Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to what is the 20th ABS AGM. I'm sure you'll all join me in extending a very warm welcome to Ellen, and she will now come and talk to us following a brief introductory video clip, because Ellen has the confidence to master technology, which I too often lack. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I'm Ellen MacArthur. When I set out to become the fastest person to sail non-stop around the world, I never believed there could be a greater challenge. I was wrong. We have the greatest challenge before us. I want to take you on a journey. We have the chance to rebuild our world. Today, I'd like to invite you to join me on the greatest adventure of our time. It's time to make the future. When you're a child, anything and everything is possible. The challenge is hanging on to that as you grow up. And for me as a child, my dream was to sail around the world. I'd had the chance at 4 years old to try sailing for the first time. And I will never, ever forget that feeling that I felt as I first saw the boat. The feeling I felt when I first climbed onto the boat and looked into this tiny cabin that was going to be our home for the following week. But the most amazing feeling was the feeling I felt when we hoisted the sails for the first time. Because as a child, that was the greatest sense of freedom I could ever imagine. But as a child, I grew up in Derbyshire, about as far from the sea as you can possibly get. And my sailing was dreaming. From the age of 8, I started to save up for a boat because, being slightly more expensive than a football to kick around the park, I needed to save, and not having pocket money when I was a child, I started saving my school dinner money. And from 11 at secondary school right through to 17, every single day at school I had mashed potato and baked beans. Free gravy piled on top, and I saved a pile of change, put it on the top of my money box, and when that pile reached £1, I would drop it in and cross off one of the 100 squares that I'd drawn on a piece of graph paper. And finally I bought the little boat you can see in the garden. And by the time I was 17, I'd managed to buy a boat, which I was to embark on my first solo journey in. I bought her as a wreck, and I spent 1.5 years doing her up. And education is an interesting thing. When I was at school, I never ever thought that I could sail around the world unless I'd been out there, got a job, earned enough money, and bought a boat to do so. When I went through my education, I was trying to be a vet. I loved animals, and I tried as hard as I could at school to get the results, get the grades, to go through university and study for that degree. But as I was going through school, as I was doing my mock exams, as I spent 3 years every single Saturday working at a vet to gain experience for free, as work experience, as I went through that process, when my mock exam results came through, the careers advisor said, "To be honest, Ellen, you're not clever enough. Don't bother applying." She knew I'd been for 5 years to a vet's every Saturday. And when you're growing up, that's a big knock. And for me, I said to myself, right, I'm going to get these grades. I'm going to take a year out, get the grades, and I'm going to go to veterinary school 1 year late. And during that year, I was knocked down with glandular fever. Despite the fact I was working till 2 in the morning with that illness, there's no way I could have made those grades. But it was the best thing that happened to me. Because during that month of being flat, lying on the sofa, there was a TV programme on, 3 o'clock in the morning, about the Whitbread Round the World race. And I borrowed my nan's video recorder, recorded this programme, and then lay on the sofa watching it. And as that dynamic music was there on the screen and these people were sailing on these boats around the world, I realised you could do that with sponsorship. And from that moment on, I was going to sail around the world and I was going to find a sponsor. It changed my life. I left school at 17, went back to take my A-levels, went through the schooling system right at the end as fast as I could because my goal was to try and find that sponsor and sail off around the world. And the first stage was proving that I could do something. So aged 18, I set off from Hull Marina on the northeast coast on my first solo journey after working at a sailing school for a year to earn bits and pieces to fix the boat. I set off. That journey took me 4.5 months to get around Britain, left on the 1st of June 1995. That was a month longer than it took me to get around the world the first time. But it was an amazing experience. It taught me so much. It taught me about what I could do, not just about what I couldn't. And as I sailed down the west coast of the UK, I couldn't help but feel if I hang a right, the first land that I'd reach would be Newfoundland, America, or Nova Scotia. And I held that thought. I still tried to find funding. I'd slept in a porter cabin in a boatyard for 1.5 years. I lived on this boat for 2.5 years. And I went along this journey never questioning for 1 second whether that could happen. Not 1 second. So imagine how it felt to be in a design meeting in 1999, having secured a partner for the boat, to be sitting there with a group of designers designing a boat on which I was going to sail solo non-stop around the world. I couldn't believe I was living my life. I couldn't believe it was real. And the first time I sailed her down in Auckland Harbour, I actually thought I was in heaven. If my life had stopped there and then, I would have been the happiest person on earth. I was so happy, in fact, I sailed the boat halfway around the world in training because I just wanted to be with her out at sea. And I was coming home for my first big round-the-world race, the first one of my life, the Vendée Globe, against 24 other competitors that winter. And before that, just after arriving home, there was a transatlantic race. Now, that race was the precursor to the Vendée. It was the test for all the boats. You're against all the other guys that you'll be racing against that winter. And in that first race, against the best sailors in the world, in a boat we'd literally just built, I won. And what that meant was when I crossed the start line for that Vendée Globe that November, I was no longer little Ellen from Derbyshire, 24 years old, who'd been lucky enough to find a sponsor, but I was one of the race favourites. And it put that race into a whole different context and a whole different light. But that race was one of the most amazing things I've ever experienced. It was everything I dreamt of. Surfing down 60-foot mountains of the Southern Ocean under the moonlit sky, seeing icebergs 100 times the size of this room, 1 kilometre long, sailing past caves in those icebergs that if I'd been sailing past at night and taken the wrong direction, I could have sailed Kingfisher straight into. It was an absolute dream. I saw whales in the Southern Ocean, dolphins in the Atlantic, the huge albatross flying behind the boat, and I was out there racing, and I was loving it. I was loving making those decisions. I was loving making those calls on the weather, checking the boat, repairing the boat, running the boat. You are actually totally in control of that little world that you're sailing on at sea. So what a change the finish was. Through my whole life, well, from 4 anyway, my goal had been to sail around the world. And the moment that finish gun fired, I'd achieved it. That race was over. That goal had gone away. And what do you feel inside? You should feel this incredible elation, that amazing feeling of achieving the thing that you dreamt of your entire life. But actually, it was a mixture of feelings I felt. Because the one thing that I craved was stepping off that boat back into normality. And normality wasn't there. So to begin with, you celebrate because there were 360,000 people lining the channel in Les Sables-d'Olonne in France. Unbelievable, unheard of, just extraordinary. That's not real life. People shouting and screaming and firing off flares, so happy, and you're happy with them because you feel like you've just dropped into the middle of someone else's party. But this slide shows a very different Ellen. That was the real Ellen, 30 minutes after I stepped off the boat. When I see my face in that picture, I don't see elation, I see fear. because we don't realise how precious our anonymity is until we lose it. And at that moment, I realised I had lost something very precious. But in my heart, the dream had been racing, and I knew the best thing for me would be to get straight back out to sea again. So within 6 months of crossing that finish line, I chose to set off around the world again, but the second time not in a race. This time it would be a record to try to be the fastest person ever solo non-stop around the world. Now that needed a different boat, a faster boat, a more energetic boat. They're lighter because they have no lead underneath to keep them the right way up, which means they sail very fast. They're high performance, but they also have a dangerous side. This boat miraculously didn't capsize. No one knows how. There were 11 guys on that when that happened, sailing off the French coast. This boat clearly did capsize. As you can see, it's going over. And when you see those figures clinging to the net on the right-hand side of the picture, you realize just how big the boats are and how far below those people the sea is. And one of the biggest risks is when these things capsize, if those nets hit the water, you're trapped underneath them and you can't breathe. And I know that situation very well because I am one of the crew on this boat. We flipped 60 miles offshore. I was actually inside at the time, getting something to eat, joking with the guys. There was a little tap. And then 5 seconds later, we were upside down, pitch black, all the windows underwater, and I was outside the escape hatch trying to find one of my best friends who I knew was trapped under the nets. Now, all of us made it out of there safely, but it just shows you how quickly things can go wrong on those boats. They're exceptionally fast, but at the same time, they're exceptionally dangerous. So when I crossed the start line of that solo non-stop round the world record, the bar wasn't only high because I was sailing a multi-hull, but no one had ever made it round the world solo non-stop in a multi-hull in history. Many had tried, it had never been done. The boats had flipped, broken up, or faltered on the way. But not only was I trying to get the boat round the world, which when we built her was the goal, as fast as possible, but whilst we built her, a Frenchman took a 90-foot boat, 15 feet bigger than this one, that was designed to be sailed by a crew of 10 and took her around the world solo. And he took the record I was trying to break from 93 days right down to 72. And everyone said that would stand for a decade, and it deserved to. His feat was extraordinary. So when I crossed that start line, the bar was not just high, but very, very high. And the pressure to sail that boat as fast as possible could never have been greater. And if you imagine what it's like to be on a big boat in the ocean, I don't know if any of you have sailed, it's pretty fast. It's very dark, it's very wet, huge, huge waves. But the faster you go, the harder that gets. You are living on that boat with your body pumped full of adrenaline all the time. You don't feel hungry. You don't fancy anything specific to eat because all you're doing is trying to stay alive and sail the boat as fast as possible. It's a bit like driving a car. Imagine at 20 miles an hour. It really isn't stressful. You can talk to someone next to you. Your heart's not particularly pumping fast. You're just there driving a car. You feel in control. Take that to 40, it gets a bit more stressful. Take it to 60, it gets even more stressful. 70, 80, 90, 100. When you're driving a car at 100, your white knuckles are there on the wheel. You're concentrating all you can to keep that car on the road. And on the boat, there's no headlights, there's no windscreen wipers, and you're driving as fast as you can, not for days, not for weeks, but for months on end. It was the most extraordinary thing to live through, and it takes you to a very different place. And you begin to realize many things. When you're on that boat, you take with you a minimum of resources. You take with you the minimum food, the minimum fuel, the minimum water. Because if you don't, you have absolutely no chance of breaking that record. Because the bar's high, that boat needs to be light. And when you set off around the world, you manage them because you understand overwhelmingly the definition of the word finite. If you run out, there is no more. You are 2,500 miles away from the nearest petrol station for diesel or the nearest town to buy anything. You are quite literally in another world. And though I stepped off that boat having created the most incredible set of emotions, having experienced some of the most amazing things I will in my life, actually I stepped off that boat with a very different thought in my mind. Yes, I'd broken the record, but actually I began to question, is our world any different from that boat? We on our world have a finite number of resources, and never before in my life had I ever thought that. Never before in my life had I ever questioned that. It was totally new to me. And it was a bit like seeing something glinting under a stone, lifting it up and seeing something, and having two choices. You either put that stone down and you carry on with your dream job, and it was my dream job, sailing non-stop around the world, racing these incredible boats. I dreamt of that since the age of 4 years old, and I had absolutely no wish to stop. Or do you put that stone aside and you start to learn more? And I couldn't put the stone back. I put it aside, and I began a journey of learning which opened my eyes. 5 years I spent learning about this subject, our futures, before creating the foundation. I met CEOs, I met scientists, I met young people, I talked to farmers, I talked to experts all over the world. What I found absolutely fascinated me. It was like picking up the biggest set of textbooks you could ever imagine that had not even been finished being written, and learning fast. And I love learning, I've always loved learning, that's why I love the racing, because I wanted to learn about everything, from fixing myself to fixing the boat. And this was bigger. This was a much bigger challenge, and this challenge wasn't relevant to me, really at all, on the scale of things. It was very much relevant to our futures. This picture astounded me when I found it, because this is a picture of the biggest oil tanker in the world. That tanker is so big that when it's fully laden, it will not fit up the English Channel. It's too deep. Yet in the UK, we get through 3 of those every single week. And as I discovered things like this, they made me really think. You know, looking at oil, no one knows how much oil we've got left. Not one single person in the world can put the finger on that number. It's never going to run out. There will always be oil underground. But one thing is absolutely for certain. No one makes it anymore. We only have it once. And when I picked up the 2008 IE International Energy Agency report, which said, we're not about to run out of oil, but we've got about 30 years left, 40 years left, I couldn't believe it. 40 years was my lifetime. Never had I thought about this before. And it's not just oil, but also energy. Another subject close to my heart was coal. My great-grandfather was a coal miner. And on my research into coal, I went to power stations, pits. This was in the burner of a coal-fired power station. I don't know if anyone's ever been in the burner. It obviously wasn't lit, else I wouldn't be here. But they are extraordinary. That was like a 180-foot high cathedral. There were pipes lining all the walls. These were the guys who were in there welding, fixing those pipes that carry the steam, that drive the turbines, that are probably putting the lights on in this room here today. It's extraordinary that we are capable of building something so big, so powerful, of improving the efficiency, putting different types of coal dust in, putting other materials in with the coal dust, driving it forward, creating the energy that has allowed us to develop over the last 100 years. It fascinated me. It's part of our history. And when I put up a picture of my great-grandfather, you see that and you think, that's another era. He was a coal miner. We don't really do that anymore. But that's me with my great-grandfather. And by the way, they are not his real ears. And I remember sitting on his knee. I remember listening to his mining stories. I remember him talking about the fact that when the miners left the pits, they would save the crusts of their sandwiches to give to the pit ponies that had retired and were kept around the mouth of the pits. I remember the stories of camaraderie, the stories about taking birds down into the mines to detect gas. It's like it was yesterday. I was very close to my great-grandfather. I remember him vividly. And yet, as I went on this journey of learning about coal, the black stuff we're all so used to, one of the places I visited was the World Coal Association. And there in the middle of their homepage, it said 118 years. And I saw it and I thought, well, that's well outside my lifetime. But my great-grandfather was born 118 years ago. And I sat on his knee until I was 11 years old. And it's nothing. It's no time. And in seeing that figure and realizing that, I made the decision that never in my life would I think I would make. And that was to decide to really leave sailing entirely behind me and to focus on something which was far more important than yet going off around the world once more. And that was the subject of our futures. And it's not just coal. It's also materials, energy, materials. We can't actually separate energy and materials from any part of our economy because it's driven by everything. Everything is interconnected in our globalized world. And some of the figures in this New Scientist report stated indium in the screen of every LCD screen, in your mobile phones and computers, 13 years. Look at things like copper, zinc, 40, 70, 80. We're talking about really, really close figures. And the articles you see in the news marry up with that. Yes, last year, copper went up by 30% in price. Again, no one makes this stuff anymore. We have this once in the history of humanity. And there are some interesting changes going on with the economy, aside of the fact that we're pumping money in to try and shore it up. This came out earlier on this year. The GMO, which is one of the greatest investment companies in the US, they announced, they brought out their quarterly report, and one of their top analysts, a guy called Grantham, wrote this paper saying there has been a significant shift in the history of our world. In 2002, the basic commodity price, the price of everything, and they're listed underneath, coffee, copper, corn, cotton, diammonium phosphate, flaxseed, gold, iron ore, jute, lard, those basic commodities had decreased in price for 100 years. And in 2002, that shifted. There was a paradigm shift, and those prices started to increase. We've had this access to free energy, effectively free energy. It's been there to be pumped out of the ground. In fact, it was squirting out of the ground in America when we first started to pull it out. Now it's becoming more and more expensive to extract. Not about to run out, but it's getting more and more expensive. And it's a paradigm shift in our history. And when you look at this finite number of resources that we know that we have, and you look at the way our economy works, you realize that there's a flaw, because we live in a linear economy. Our processes are taking something out of the ground that is finite, making something out of that, and then at the end of that thing's life, be it a washing machine, a mobile phone, or a pencil, we throw it away. It's a linear system. It comes out of one place and ends up in another. Now, where is a way? When we throw something away, is there an away? And also, when you look at the way we produce things, when we look at the way we make things, I think more and more in the last 10 years, we've become aware of the fact things are finite. We've become aware of the fact that oil won't be around forever and that it's becoming more expensive. And when you look at the strategies for dealing with that, when I talked to the CEOs, when I went off on this 5-year journey, people were talking about efficiency. Now, yes, efficiency is absolutely vital, because when you have a finite resource, like me on my boat, I needed to be efficient. And I need to use it at the slowest rate possible. But ultimately, if you take a resource and you make something out of it and you throw it away, no matter how efficiently you make that, if at the end of its life it still gets thrown away, or part of it gets recycled, but as we recycle today, downcycled, then you will still end up in exactly the same place in the end. You will run out. What you're doing by just being efficient is buying yourself more time. And I made myself think and think and think, because I was learning and changing my life about all these things that I was discovering. But where will it actually get us? Where does being efficient actually get us? Is it a solution in itself? And I thought about young people. If you're a young person who entered education last September, you won't retire until 2070. Yet your education is preparing you for your life. It's preparing you for your future. We don't know what the world's going to be like in 2030, let alone 2070. And if the goal for that young person is to be as efficient as possible, to use as little as possible, to have the smallest footprint possible, what can they actually do? What is their goal? Do they want to take on the world and go out there and challenge things? Or do they question whether they should even be here? And to me, efficiency alone was not something you could go into every school, be it a business school or a primary school, and talk to those young people about, or speak to those business leaders about. Because is it a place we actually want to get to? That was the question. And then I started to meet people who were thinking in a very different way. A Welsh education expert, Ken Webster, a Dutch CEO, Stef Kranendijk, a scientist from Germany, Michael Braungart. These guys were thinking in a different way. They were thinking about non-linear systems. They were talking about cyclical systems. And when you start to talk to these people, you realize there is one very, very different way of looking at this challenge that we all have ahead of us. A different way of thinking, and a way which doesn't just mean that you eke things out a bit longer, but you redesign things by intention from the outset to fit within a much bigger system. The Dutch CEO has a carpet company. They make industrial carpet tiles. They may even be on the floor of this room here today. Not the sexiest of products, no, but they have designed their carpet to be disassembled. So when you rent the carpet, because you don't have to buy it, at the end of that lease period, it goes back to them, back to the manufacturer. They want it back because they want the raw materials, because they have a system they put it through, a machine, which takes it all apart. It takes the yarn off. It takes the base off. The base gets crushed, melted down, and put into the base of the next carpet. And the yarn is a specially designed yarn, which is sent back to the yarn supplier, who repolymerizes the yarn, and then sends it back to the factory. Now, his intention is to do that using entirely renewable energy by 2020. Once he's there, he knows his costs for the next 25 years. He's invested in his energy for the next 25 years. And whilst doing this, and whilst putting this process in place, his EBIT's gone up from 0.9 to over 5. He didn't do that because the CSR department sat there and said, you know, you really want to think about using a bit less. He looked at the future of his business, and he wanted it to be there in the future. And I think this is a fascinating point, is this was him as the CEO saying, this is where we're going as a business. Everybody in that company understands. All those guys on the production line understand that that carpet is designed to cycle as many times as possible. Another plant we visited here in the UK, Ricoh, they make photocopiers and fax machines, printers. If you go to the Ricoh plant in Telford, there are about 900 people employed there, but 600 are employed in remanufacturing, 600 jobs. They take a printer, which normally would be thrown away. As we know, you generally buy the ink cartridges for more than a printer these days. They're not designed to last, because the business model relies on you buying another printer in order for that company to make money. But what Ricoh are doing, and they're beginning the process, they're not all the way there yet, is they're taking these printers, these photocopiers back in, they're remanufacturing them, ultrasonically cleaning them, and they go back out the door with the same warranty as a brand new printer. They're designing things differently. And as they say, they're not there yet, but their goal is that a printer is designed for disassembly, is designed to be remanufactured again and again and again and again. It provides jobs, it provides security, and it provides printers, and it gives us the services that we want today. And these are technical products. How about biological products? You know, when we work with young people at the foundation, we talk about things in their lives that are relevant to the subject of their futures. And you talk about their bin. Their view of a bin is being really negative. Having a big bin is a really negative thing. Yet, when you think about redesigning that, redesigning everything within that, then you start to look at a much, much bigger system. Currently, you know, a plastic bag. I've got one here. A plastic bag, this is designed to have magazines in. It's see-through, it looks just like a plastic bag. When we work with young people, we show them this plastic bag, and they think this is really negative. But this isn't negative, because it's made to biodegrade, it's totally non-toxic, and actually, this, once biodegraded, has a value. It's never thrown away, because when it biodegrades, it can become fertilizer for a farm. Now, that's one bag in one bin. What if everything was redesigned in the bin? What if everything that's a consumable that we use for a few hours, or maybe a few weeks, or maybe at the most a few months, those things that end up in our bins, what if they were all redesigned? What an amazing opportunity to redesign a system that not only deals with waste, but doesn't create waste. It creates value. And if you redesign the whole system, you end up, through the process of biodegrading the bag and the waste, you end up creating clean water, fertilizer, fish. This is a biodigester out in Haiti. It was the only sanitation system in Haiti to survive the earthquake. They have clean water, they have jobs, they have food, they have fish, they have security. And what you realize is, if you redesign that system, for example, you have the opportunity to not just eke things out a bit longer, not just redesign things, but you actually have the ability to build capital. Natural capital, fertilizer for farmland. Currently, half the world is fed using fertilizer we dig out of a hole in the ground, which is obviously finite. If you redesign a system, you can create fertilizer. And when we talk to young people about these ideas, they get it. They want to redesign everything. They see this as the biggest opportunity that they've come across, and they take it because they want to do it. They see it as an opportunity, therefore they absolutely run with it. It's amazing to see. And of course, one of the precursors to all this is energy. Ultimately, we do need to run things on renewable energy in the future. We do need to run things on energy that we can secure long-term in the future. And these business leaders know this. They can see energy prices every single year going up. If you ask a CEO, well, where will their business be in 50 years, most can't answer the question. But the Dutch CEO can. Other CEOs are starting to do this because they're starting to question the model. And you realize that there's a bit of a paradox. In business, you have traditionally the CSR department that's there saying, our goal is to use less. We want to recycle more. We want to use 10% less energy over the next 2 years. And then you have the board, and their goal is to drive growth. That is their goal. We need to grow the company every year, because if they don't, they probably won't even have a job the next year, because they're in there to run that business to give return to shareholders. But there's a paradox between the two. But when you look at redesigning a whole system, the way a company functions, such as the Dutch carpet manufacturer has, then actually you have a way whereby you can redesign the way the company works, you can secure its future, and you can grow it. And they're growing very, very fast. And that gives such a positive story for that CEO to stand there on the stage and say, this is where we're going. We're not there yet. We're not going to be there in 5 or even 10 years. But this is where we're heading. And you start to see the opportunities far beyond one system. If you think about this, you have to think in systems. It's not about redesigning a plastic bag. It's redesigning a system, which means redesigning the elements within it. If you think about an electric car, we think of an electric car as a replacement for our current petrol car. And we talk about the pros and cons. Some people love them, some people hate them. But ultimately, that is one suggestion of a solution for the future. But if you could build the car using entirely renewable energy, as Renault plan to do with their Tangier plant, if you can design the car so that it's designed for disassembly, and maybe the body isn't made of steel, which takes vast amounts of energy to create, but it's made of a biological polymer or a plastic that can be infinitely cycled. If that car then runs on renewable energy, and then at the end of its life it gets disassembled and goes back into the manufacturer, probably through the fact that you've leased it rather than bought it. And then what if the battery within that car serves another purpose within a system? So we have a massive challenge running on renewable energy in the future of actually storing energy. How do we store energy? Well, these cars have huge batteries. I have one at home. The batteries alone cost 16,000 euros. Now, that's far too expensive compared to petrol, but Renault won't sell you the battery. You rent the battery when you buy the car. So they keep the batteries cycle. You swap the battery in the car so you can do a long journey. But that battery sits as part of a much bigger system, because when we have an ad break on our TVs and we turn on the kettle every time the adverts come on, we need energy from somewhere. Now, starting up a coal-fired power station, as I've seen with my own eyes, is extraordinarily difficult. But just sucking energy the other way down a cable is a very different way of seeing things. So not only is it about redesign, not only is it about designing for disassembly, designing out waste from the outset, and asking the briefers of the design team, when you design that product, A, design it for disassembly. Make the product out of materials we can recover, that can infinitely cycle. And we can't do this straight away, but develop them. That's a goal. That's something that we don't ask at the moment. At the moment we deal with a product at the end, we don't design it out from the beginning. And that's the basic difference between a linear and a circular economy. The linear will always go in a straight line, and the circular is designed to cycle again and again and again. And what we found when we work with businesses on this is you start to ask different questions and you start to use different language. When do you hear a company talk about return on resources? Never. We don't measure like that. We measure on return on investment. A whole new language is developing, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see where this can go, because we're not just talking about making products differently or even designing a system differently, but we're talking about different models of rental. Or do you buy 3,000 washes of a washing machine? It's a very, very different way of looking at things. And just to illustrate, I'd like to show you a 3-minute video which explains the circular economy far better than I can.
Living systems have been around for a few billion years and will be around for many more. In the living world, there's no landfill. Instead, materials flow. One species' waste is another's food, energy is provided by the sun, things grow, then die, and nutrients return to the soil safely. And it works. Yet as humans, we've adopted a linear approach. We take, we make, and we dispose. A new phone comes out, so we ditch the old one. Our washing machine packs up, so we buy another. Each time we do this, we're eating into a finite supply of resources and often producing toxic waste. It simply can't work long term. So what can? If we accept that the living world's cyclical model works, can we change our way of thinking so that we too operate a circular economy? Let's start with the biological cycle. How can our waste build capital rather than reduce it? By rethinking and redesigning products and components, and the packaging they come in, we can create safe and compostable materials that help grow more stuff. As they say in the movies, no resources have been lost in the making of this material. So what about the washing machines, mobile phones, fridges? We know they don't biodegrade. Here, we're talking about another sort of rethink, a way to cycle valuable metals, polymers and alloys so they maintain their quality and continue to be useful beyond the shelf life of individual products. What if the goods of today became the resources of tomorrow? It makes commercial sense. Instead of the throw-away and replace culture we've become used to, we'd adopt a return and renew one, where products and components are designed to be disassembled and regenerated. One solution may be to rethink the way we view ownership. What if we never actually owned our technologies? We simply licensed them from the manufacturers. Now, let's put these two cycles together. Imagine if we could design products to come back to their makers, their technical materials being reused and their biological parts increasing agricultural value. And imagine that these products are made and transported using renewable energy. Here we have a model that builds prosperity long term. And the good news is, there are already companies out there who are beginning to adopt this way of working. But the circular economy isn't about one manufacturer changing one product. It's about all the interconnecting companies that form our infrastructure and economy coming together. It's about energy. It's about rethinking the operating system itself. We have a fantastic opportunity to open new perspectives and new horizons. Instead of remaining trapped in the frustrations of the present, with creativity and innovation, we really can rethink and redesign our future.
When I was a kid, I wanted to sail around the world and I knew exactly where I was going. And that's an important step in actually getting somewhere. And when I started out on this journey 5 years ago, I had no idea where we were going. I could see a huge challenge, but now I really can, through the conversations with these people who are leading the field, and through CEOs who are brave enough to take that step and actually prove that it works. Last September, we launched the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a charity set up to inspire a generation to rethink, redesign, and build a positive future. The funding for the foundation comes entirely from the corporate sector. And by the 2nd of September last year, we'd raised £6 million. Now, that's not from the government, that's through businesses. And I'll never forget the first meeting that we had with National Grid, and Steve Holliday, the CEO, said, in the next decade, we're about to spend £42 billion on the UK energy infrastructure, yet we do not have young people leaving education with the skills needed to do that. This is about an evolving and changing world, but more importantly, the opportunities which lie within it. The foundation works with secondary schools, higher education, further education, and we're announcing today that we're all working with MBA schools. But what's absolutely vital in this is if we need to change, it's about grasping an opportunity. I believe this is the biggest opportunity that we've ever seen. We have the chance to redesign our system, the way in which we live across the entire world in a way that can work in the long term. And what's fascinating about the circular economy is that works as well in a developed country as a developing. In fact, it's probably even more relevant to a developing country because they have the ability to leapfrog a system that's linear to a system that's cyclical. And the companies who've backed the foundation, the companies who've supported what we're doing and continue to do so, we also work with. We're 80% education, 20% business. So we work with each of those companies, BT and Cisco working together, National Grid, Renault, and B&Q. And we work with the teams who are developing products within those companies. 2 weeks after we launched the foundation, Ewan Sutherland, the CEO of B&Q, stood on a stage at a business conference and confused everybody because he said, in the future, retailers like B&Q may not sell anything anymore. He's thinking of a totally different business model. And he's thinking of a business model that can work for that company in 50 or 100 years' time. And why not 1,000? It's about long-term strategic thinking. And in a world which is changing fast, as we all know, that's exactly where we need to be. And the buy-in from those CEOs for us is vital, because we can see that they see this as a positive model moving forwards, and they see this as an opportunity. And a lot of them are doing internal work, and they're starting to look at facts and figures, and what they're seeing is extraordinary. And when we work with these young people, we get some incredible feedback. They come along to one of our events. This was a redesign project. We had 800 A-level students right across the UK. We set them all in 5 different regions, the same challenge. Each winning team went to a founding partner and spent a week there. It was amazing for everyone. We learnt a huge amount working with them. They learnt a huge amount about the circular economy. Then they went into these businesses and challenged design teams. They challenged the Renault design team about their car design. They went in there and they presented their thoughts on National Grid to the senior management. B&Q have started a junior board. This is about thinking differently, and it's about challenging a system that we all know is fundamentally flawed. And what these young people aren't afraid of is that challenge and that opportunity. And there's one line that sums up everything that we do at the foundation. And there was a young lad from the Midlands who'd been working with his teacher that we'd been working on development material with. And he came up to his teacher and he said, "Sir, when I did my GCSEs, I couldn't think of anything to design." He was studying design and technology. And then he said, "But now I've learned about the circular economy. I look at everything and I want to redesign it." It's about opportunity. And on that point, I'd like to say that today the Foundation's announcing that it has an international circular economy business schools network, and we're running MBA programs with Leeds Business School in the circular economy. We're running a distance learning MBA from Bradford University. We're actually already with them running a postgrad certificate in the circular economy, which started 2 weeks ago, the first lecture of which was given by Ewan Sutherland, the CEO now of Kingfisher Europe. We're also working on doing a block learning course just in Marseille with the Euromed Business School. And the idea is to share this information going forwards. So what we're offering today is, through this network of international business schools, is the opportunity to be able to go to any of the lectures that any of those schools are running to see what this is all about. And if any of you aren't convinced, what we're running next year is a study tour out into Europe to see businesses that are really doing this, see businesses that are putting this into practice. So if any of you are interested, there are members of our team here. We've partnered with John Price from the CLCF to run this program. We're also working with Dr. Alan Murray, who's been one of our advisors from Leeds Business School. And what we're trying to do is to spread this open source in the most open source fashion that we possibly can. Because this doesn't really sit in a category. This is ultimately about all our futures. We're currently producing a textbook for MBA and executive MBA students on the circular economy in conjunction with Alan Murray, and the head of learning from the Foundation, Ken Webster, is writing that with him. So this is about sharing as much information as possible and getting as much information out of there. So we're very proud about that. That's just MBA. That's not what we're doing in secondary schools. It's not what we're doing with further education. It's not the work we're doing with A-level students. But this is about getting an idea out there that will provide jobs, that will provide security, that is a different way of thinking, and ultimately that means that we can thrive incredibly well in an energy-constrained and resource-constrained world. And if there's one thing that makes me question whether this is possible, it's looking at the scale of the challenge. But if there's one thing that shows me it's possible, it's actually looking at the past. This is my great-grandfather, as you know. 118 years ago, the year he was born, there were only 25 cars on the road in the entire world. 108 years ago, he was 10 years old. We flew for the first time in history. He remembered that. 83 years ago, we discovered penicillin. We saved millions of lives all over the world. 72 years ago, we developed the first computer. Many said it wouldn't catch on, but it did, and just 20 years later, it had turned into the microchip, of which there'll be hundreds of in every piece of machinery and everyone's phone in this room today. 43 years ago, we didn't just look at the moon. We actually went and stood on it, well before I was born. 33 years ago, the first mobile phone wasn't that mobile, but now they are. and we can communicate all over the world. And 22 years ago, perhaps the most important, we developed the internet. If ever in history there is a time we can do this, it's now. Because we can have an idea in this room here, and in 1 second, it can quite literally be anywhere in the world. So I believe this is entirely possible, and I believe that this is an incredible opportunity. And if anyone would like to talk about the work of the Foundation here, we've got Craig Johnson also here from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to discuss the material that's sitting on your desks. But I'd now like to open the floor to questions, because I think I've talked for enough. Thank you.